What's up, my fellow enthusiasts? We are back, and today we are talking all about balls. And what I mean by balls are those little tiny circular objects, those terp pearls, or those heat batteries, depending on what device you're using. We're going to talk about the different materials, and then we're going to talk about different shapes and sizes and what they accomplish. First off, the materials that you will find these little balls made out of. We are going to start with this bottom row here, and we're going to go over why I don't really use these. Stainless steel, this one is pretty much just for pocket portable devices using balls in their caps. These are just going to be induction heater friendly, is going to be the main draw here, but these are going to be very, very hot, and they're going to retain a lot of heat and take a lot of heat to heat up. So I don't use these in any of my desktop devices, and I don't really use them in any of my pocket devices because I'm just not a huge fan of induction heaters. Next up is borosilicate. Boro, while yes, it does work, its heat retention properties are on the low side and really shouldn't be used in these really high temp heat situations. I know some of us use these for dabbing, and really I think that's just an antiquated thing at this point, as technology, especially in the quartz space, has come really far, that using boro for pillars and pearls and other stuff is going to be more for the artisan factor if you want a really cool themed pillar set or something like that. But for heat properties and the fact that they're very susceptible to heat shock, I would just stay away from boro. Then quartz. Quartz is great for dabbing devices and flavor and all of that. But again, when it comes to heat properties as far as retention and heat shock and just other things like that, we can do a lot better than quartz. Then we are left with these top three. The most common ones used and the ones that I am going to talk about the most. Ruby, which is one of the more common ones. This is what a lot of people use for terp pearls as well as in their ball vapes. These are little red balls that would be mistaken as glass if you weren't familiar, and they are just ruby or lab-made ruby. Next up, we have ZRO2. These ones are going to be very pricey, and while they do have really good heat properties on how fast they heat up and how much retention they have, the price tag on these are very high. I don't find a lot of devices using these, and for those of us that don't care about the price tag and want to use these in devices, this is going to be some of your hottest material. And even at low temperatures, I find that the zirconium is still really hot feeling. Last up in the more common ones is SiC or silicon carbide. And out of the more common ones, this one is one that I avoid the most, whether it's for fears of health things or other just weirdisms when it comes to silicon carbide that really depends on the quality of it. I feel like silicon carbide is really hot, and for some reason I can taste it, and it really messes with the flavor of things for me a lot, so I tend to avoid silicon carbide the most. Again, ZRO2 is just too expensive to really make feasible for everyday use, and so that really leads us with Ruby as being the winner of materials that I use for my ball vapes and for terp pearls. So now that we've talked about the materials, let's go ahead and talk about the other factor to this, which is size and shape. So let's talk about size and why you would want to go bigger or smaller. For dabbing, it's a little bit of a balance of size that you want to use for two things. One is going to be heat retention. The bigger the size, the more heat retention you'll get. And since you're only using one or maybe two pearls in a banger, using a bigger size is okay for heat retention. But where you're going to run into issues is your airflow. Because you want those rubies moving inside of your quartz banger or Puffco, depending on your airflow and how much wax you put inside, you're going to need to lower the size to make sure the ruby moves around. Because if you use a 5mm and a really restrictive airflow situation, the ruby is just going to sit and sometimes chaz where it's at. So you'll want to drop down a little bit to make sure that ruby spins around. Now, if we're talking about in the ball vape world, size really matters, and bigger is not always better. And let me dive into that. So I have these examples of ball vape heads here. With the bigger size rubies, you do have more mass per ruby, but you can actually fit less weight inside the head. Because of the way that the bigger round spheres stack, you end up with these big air pockets. And so what you get is a really high airflow situation, but you have to run it at a much higher temperature. Because this is less weight of material, it won't store as much heat in this battery. And as you pull all that massive amounts of cold air, these bigger units are going to cool down a lot faster. So I've noticed when you run a bigger setup like this, 4mm or even sometimes 5 inside of a head, you get a lot of airflow, but you have to run the PID way higher to get a big hit. And that can sometimes lead to hot spotting in the middle of your bowl, depending on the construction of your bowl and what rig you're using. So then when you step down to size 3mm or even 2.5mm, you fit a lot more material inside the same size chamber because of how it stacks. And you get a lot less space for air. The other thing that happens between these two setups is that because of the way that the surface area of the air travels through, with these bigger gaps, you have a bigger channel of air. And where the ball is coming into contact with the outside of that air channel, it's only going to heat the outside of the air, leading to some coolness in the center. But when you funnel all of that air through these tight little sections, more air surface comes into contact with more surface of the hot media, increasing the air temperature of the air moving through. And what that allows you to do is turn the temperature of the PID down and still get a really nice, dense hit. However, what this does do is it makes the head a lot more restrictive. So since the head is more restrictive and you're moving less cold air through, that's another reason why you can turn your PID down and get a really nice, flavorful, dense hit with the smaller material. And then you take that theory one step further with shape. And with shape, if you do faceted 2.5mm gems, you can cram a lot more weight into the same size volume. Because of the way that the rubies stack, now instead of two balls sitting together like this, you have two triangles that sit together like this, cutting down the airflow even more. So you get a more restrictive feel with a bigger heat battery, allowing you again to turn your PID down and still get these really huge vapor-filled hits that are really smooth and taste absolutely great. And you can find these sizes in all of the different materials that I talked about, so you can definitely science up depending on what type of device you have and the airflow of the device and also the airflow of your rig. Because if you have a big recycler that's really restrictive, you might want to go with a setup like this to increase the airflow coming in to feed that recycler. Or if you have a really big bong and it's got really open airflow, you might want to restrict it down with something like this so you can really milk that airflow and get huge, dense clouds. And a lot of people ask me what the best setup is or what the best one to go with is, and I can't really answer that because again, it's all user preference. Me personally, I really like the 2.5mm gem cuts that come in something like the Screwball, and I've actually integrated those gem cuts into my other vapes from Cannabis Hardware and other desktops that I have. I think that the gem cuts are really great for the style of hit that I like to do and the rigs that I have. And if I was to choose another version, it would be the 3mm round, just again, because it adds the most weight and I can turn my PIDs down the most. And I love big vapor, big flavor, but not gonna destroy your throat. And I found I get that out of these smaller sizes. For those of you that really like those next to combustion level, really hot, heavy, you wanna turn it up and just feel the heat, maybe explore something like this. Well, huge shout out to my buddy Tasteful Gent for giving me the idea to do this video. And as always, thanks for watching and stay lifted. Psst, come hang out with us on Discord. Head over to my website to pick up some awesome stickers to support this channel.